From the magazine, Vanity Fair, October 1997 issue, October 1, 1997, by Anne Louise Bardock. JonBenét Ramsey, Missing Innocence. To gain some insight into the pageant world, I went to the Little Miss Hawaii Tropic Pageant in Denver in June, held in one of the banquet rooms of the Red Lion Hotel. A small stage and runway, decorated in purple turquoise and green tinsel palm trees, took up almost half of the room. About 50 moms, many of them seriously overweight, and a scattering of men watched as girls from infants to teenagers, several of whom had competed against JonBenét, paraded before the judges. In an adjoining banquet room, the girls changed from costume to costume from the various events: swimwear, formal wear, sportswear. Anxious mothers fussed over them, spraying their hair, lavishing their makeup on their faces, and whispering tips and encouragement. Some of the women, incensed over the bad press pageants have been getting, sought to disabuse me of the lies you may have read. Others simply confirmed the criticism. JonBenét wanted to do it. She loved it, insisted Pam Paul. JonBenét would have done the pageant every day if Patsy had let her, but Patsy said no. Church comes first on Sunday, and the other days we'll do pageants or whatever. But wouldn't we, mother and aunt, former Miss America contestants, be doing less than we should if we didn't get her ready, get her dressed, and have her look her most exquisite? JonBenét's former nanny recalls otherwise. She would say to me, "I don't want to walk down the runway. It scares me." She liked to perform, but didn't want to have to compete. The pageant videos of JonBenét strutting seductively down runways, which were played ceaselessly on television, scandalized many viewers who were unaware that child pageants even existed. JonBenét has been variously described as looking like a 6-year-old Lolita, a pint-sized kitten, and a daddy's little, well, you know. Her mock vamping has been called kitty inappropriate pictures. The Ramseys were flabbergasted at the outrage over JonBenét's pageant photos and videos. At the Ramseys' May 1 press conference, Patsy minimized her daughter's pageant life as just a few Sunday afternoons. But Marilyn Van Der Adler, a former Miss America who has gone public with her story of incest, says, "That's when I knew this woman was in serious denial." Pageant life is full-time. There are dance teachers and singing teachers and costume fittings, rehearsals, makeup, and hair. It's not a hobby. It's a career. JonBenét began competing by age 4. Pam Paul was indignant over the coverage of her niece. "They said she went for French manicures once a week. That's a lie. The night before every pageant, and I was at every single one of them, we would do what we call the pageant scrub," she says. "And it was fun. In the bathroom. Scrub up the knees, make sure the nails are clean, neat and trimmed. We washed her hair, and Aunt Pam would do the little French manicure, and that was that. Patsy and I did her hair. I'm a channel makeup artist, and that child wore so little makeup because she didn't need it." Paul concedes that JonBenét's hair was lightened, which Patsy always denied. The former nanny says JonBenét's hair was a light golden brown, which suddenly turned to platinum blonde. I said to her, "So who's dyeing your hair, JonBenét?" She was all goshed. "You're not supposed to say anything about that." I said, "Okay, it will be our little secret." "By the way," says Paul proudly, "I designed most of her clothes, and they were professionally made, and they are very ladylike. JonBenét won top honors in wardrobing every place we went. I worked with JonBenét on all her music. She had a lovely voice. Now, for Cowboy Sweetheart, she had a little routine that was taught to her by Miss Kit, who was a dance instructor. Patsy designed the cowboy sweetheart outfit, and Pam Griffin made it. I designed the black and white channel sports outfit with the little polka dot underskirt. Grigio Griffin and other moms, Tammy Paulson, say that they never saw any signs that JonBenét was not enjoying herself. Others say they had glimpses of a strain on the child. One often told story took place at Pasta J's, a restaurant run by the Ramseys' close friend, Jay Alowski. According to one version, it must have been some kind of dress-up affair or pageantry thing, because JonBenét was all dressed up with the makeup and the gown. She got cold and went up to her mother and said, "Mommy, I'd like to wear my jacket, I'm cold." And Patsy said firmly, "Not now, honey, you're still on display." Mike Glenn, a former Divinity student, met Ramsey in 1991 when he was the recruiting coordinator for the University of Colorado's football team. He needed someone to donate computer equipment to the school. Jay Alowski introduced Glenn to Ramsey, and the two struck up a close friendship. Ramsey came through with the computers and in time offered Glenn, who speaks several languages, a position on the international side of his company. With daughters close in age, the Glenns and the Ramseys often socialized. The family was almost make-believe, too perfect. It was like Ozzie and Harriet came to Boulder, says Glenn. But John could get really angry. I saw this on a few occasions involving business. Shouting and threatening, his eyes bulging like you cannot believe. It seemed like Jekyll and Hyde. In 1992, the Ramseys were blindsided by a series of tragedies. On January 8, Ramsey's eldest daughter, Elizabeth, was killed in an automobile accident. Ramsey was devastated. Jim Marino sees Elizabeth's death as this watershed event of the Ramseys' life. There was a significant change when she died, he says. He became more introverted. A few months later, Ramsey's father, who had married John's first wife's mother, also died. In the summer of 1993, Patsy was diagnosed with metastasized ovarian cancer. It was stage 4. It was clear up underneath the rib cage, says Pam Paul. Patsy began commuting to the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland for chemotherapy, and she took Taxol. I took John aside and I said, "You really need to do everything you can to help her," recalls Mike Glenn. He needed to be reminded, and he did take some time off and traveled with her. Judith Phillips was distressed to learn that her very ill friend was flying back and forth across the country by herself, sick as a dog, vomiting. Where the heck was John? In 1995, the cancer went into remission. She was healed of God, claims Pam, because she had cancer one day and not the next. Patsy's illness, according to one knowledgeable insider, was complicated by the fact that implants from a breast augmentation early in her marriage ruptured and needed additional surgery. Following her recovery, she celebrated by having a partial facelift. On the morning of December 26th, Patsy Ramsey phoned her mother in Atlanta. Immediately, Pam, Polly, and Polly's husband flew to Boulder. After discovery of the body, Patsy declared to her friends that she would never go back to that house again. In the first days, the Ramseys and the Paul sisters moved into John and Barbara Fernie's place in South Boulder. Another friend, Patty Novak, who is a registered nurse, stayed nights with Patsy. Patsy was completely devastated, says Novak. She needed to be taken into the shower and assisted in the bathroom. While Patsy wept, John paced. The first night he was completely pacing, says Novak, and I had to wake up his brother Jeff because I needed to keep an eye on John. The first night, Patsy slept on a futon and John must have slept on a couch. They pretty much did not sleep. On December 28th, with their lawyers present, the Ramsey gave hair and blood samples and were fingerprinted. She was a wreck, says one source. As she was being fingerprinted, she became hysterical, saying, "Why are you doing this? Do you think I killed my baby?" In June, Patsy Ramsey, who was heavily medicated after her daughter's death, told friends that she could not remember anything. Not the murder night, the days after, nothing. Investigators began to worry about an amnesia defense. Others recalled her emotionally charged remark during the Ramseys' May 1st press conference that it won't be long before she sees JonBenét again. On December 29th, the family flew to Marietta, Georgia in a private jet piloted by John Ramsey for JonBenét's funeral. Among those who went there to comfort the Ramseys that first week were Fleet and Priscilla White. Soon, however, questions and doubts began to nag at the Whites. Fleet White phoned the Paul house and said he wanted to come by, speak with John. When the Whites arrived, they were led into the sunroom, where Ramsey, his brother Jeff, and Don Paul were waiting. According to an insider, Ramsey sat down next to Priscilla and began to pat her arm as if to calm her down, as her husband pelted him with questions. Why do you need all these attorneys? Why aren't you cooperating with the police? His distress mounting, he declared. I don't understand what you are doing. Priscilla later told friends that she had told John that going on CNN was a big mistake. Nigel would later tell police that White was a wild man and a lunatic. Ramsey would inform friends that the worm had turned. According to a DA source, Ramsey told his lawyers and the DA that he regarded Fleet White, whom he had often identified as his best friend, as a prime suspect in JonBenét's murder. In the ensuing weeks, the Ramsey team spread the word that the Whites were not to be trusted. Pam Griffin was also among those who carried the message. This man has a dark side, she told me over the phone. Pressed to explain how Fleet White could have possibly killed JonBenét, she said, I don't think Fleet White, with his two hands, murdered that child. I just think he knows something. The Whites declined to comment for this story. The Whites were the first of what police have come to call the throwaway friends. Anyone suspected of the vaguest disloyalty to the Ramseys soon showed up on a list they gave to police. Ramsey panicked, started throwing all his friends under the bus, says radio host Peter Boyles. Beginning with his best friend, Jeff Merrick, Mike Glenn, Jim Marino, were all horrified to learn that Ramsey had placed them on a suspect list. All of them were questioned by detectives and asked to give blood and hair samples. Later, they learned that Haddon's team had identified them to police as disgruntled former employees. Access employees were told that anyone who spoke with the press or the police without permission would be fired. One of the detectives, Steve Thomas, told me to come in and asked me point blank if I killed her, says Merrick, still fuming. I have no doubt that Ramsey tried to set me up. The specific question the police kept asking me was, why does John Ramsey keep throwing your name out? They asked me to take a polygraph. I said, sure, no problem. As soon as John Ramsey takes one. Early in 1996, Ramsey had decided that he wanted to get rid of Merrick. Merrick was shifted to another job, which was soon eliminated. When Merrick confronted Ramsey, his friend of 25 years told him that he was powerless to help him. Merrick filed a complaint with Lockheed Martin, which later prompted the Ramsey team to put him on another suspect list. Jane Stobbe was not surprised that Ramsey had gone from defending himself to accusing his friends. She was familiar with the strategy. I knew those people were bad news. We called it the evil empire for a reason. Marino and Glenn had much softer landings. They were moved around the company to positions that either overtaxed them or made them unhappy enough to quit. Both of them, as well as Merrick, went on to better, higher paid jobs. Glenn and Marino left on fairly good terms. Both immediately phoned Ramsey after the murder to offer their condolences. He was my best friend for a lot of years, says Marino, with difficulty. That's what hurt me the most. He indicated that Mike and Jeff were his enemies, and I can tell you, they never were. I was contacted by the Boulder police about 2 weeks later, wanting to talk to me about where I was on the night of the murder, says Mike Glenn, who now lives in Tucson. They said my name had been mentioned by Ramsey's attorney as someone they needed to check out. I was pretty dumbfounded. In February and March, Glenn says, his family was tormented by 3 weeks of media constantly bombarding. His neighbors were interviewed by TV crews. When even asked, according to Glenn, do you know the Ramsey family considers him to be a major suspect in the murder of their daughter? In April, after 2 visits from a private investigator named John Foster, who said he worked for the Ramseys, Glenn called a Boulder detective to find out why the PI was snooping around. He learned that virtually everyone the police had interviewed got a visit soon after by one of Ramsey's personal sleuths. I said, why are they doing that? And the police said, to obscure the truth. Foster must have told me 6 times that John didn't give my name to the police. However, detectives told Glenn that Ramsey had given his name almost immediately. Foster explained that the Ramseys had formed a team to try to solve this murder. You know, the police are a small town operation. They don't know what they're doing, but they're not willing to take any kind of help. Foster continued to pester Glenn, trying to learn what he had told police. After 40 minutes, Glenn told him to leave. Foster declined to comment for this story. Judith Phillips, who last saw Patsy in March, says, I was still a true blue supporter of her. According to Phillips, Patsy asked her to contact Leslie Durgan, Boulder's mayor, and a pile of Phillips. Durgan, who describes Patsy as barely an acquaintance, was surprised at the message Phillips conveyed from her. Why aren't you protecting me? Durgan tersely replied via Phillips, we're doing everything we can. I'm supporting the police. Weeks later, Phillips says she learned that she too had flunked the loyalty test. In April, one of Patsy's close friends phoned her to say that the Ramseys never wanted to see me again. I was not their friend. Even Barbara Fernie, according to friends, began to have doubts. For months, she and Patsy had been inseparable, shopping, lunching, chatting on the phone. By early spring, Fernie began telling people, I am the one doing the grieving. Something is wrong with Patsy. Soon, friends say, Barbara was dropped from the Ramsey inner circle. Though her husband, John, has continued his relationship with Ramsey, as have many other business associates. One by one, many of the Ramseys' Boulder friends quietly slipped away. However, as more and more of these friends lost faith in them, the DA's team seemed to work more and more closely with Haddon's team. They openly began to give credence to the intruder theory promoted in Haddon's office. Detectives would sit numbly as Hofstrom dismissed their carefully collected evidence, and Lou Smith offered the theory that a grown man had sneaked in through a broken window so narrow that even Hunter discounted the possibility. No one came through that window, he told me in June. But by July, the Haddon team had convinced Hofstrom, DeMuth, and Smith that it was possible. I've talked to Alex a great deal, Pamela Griffin told me, and he has some people working on the case who have called me, and they do not think the Ramseys did it. Pam Paul told me in June, the fact that the district attorney is working with Patsy and John's team is enough to tell the world that they are off the hook. If I thought you did it and I was the police or the DA, would I be working on a daily basis with your hired lawyers and investigators, telling you what I know and them telling me what they know so I could turn around and arrest you? No, because I could never convict you. End of part 4.